Have you ever questioned the thin boundary between reality and the supernatural? Where do you draw the line between the explainable and the inexplicable? Prepare to be riveted as we unveil a tale that has sent shivers down spines for years. You will not be stepping into another true crime story. You're plunging into an abyss of darkness, tragedy, and the unknown. Get ready for the mysterious tale of the Sodder Children. It was the night of December 24th, 1945, Christmas Eve. The Sodder family was filled with holiday cheer, completely unaware of the terrible fate that awaited them. The Sodders, a tight-knit and loving family of 12, were residents of Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder had built a happy life with their 10 children, but tragedy struck their home that winter evening. A devastating fire engulfed their house, leaving their once vibrant home a smoldering ruin. George Sodder was born Giorgio Soddu in Tula, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the U.S. at the age of 13 with his older brother. Over the years, George never talked much about why he had left Italy. George found work with the railroads in Pennsylvania as support for the railroad workers, supplying them with water and other supplies that they needed. Later on, he became a truck driver and eventually started his own transport business. George later married 𝗔𝗍𝗄𝗏 Cipriani, an Italian herself, the daughter of a storekeeper. The Sodders made a home outside of Fayetteville, West Virginia, which had a large population of Italian immigrants. In 1923, they had the first of 10 children, and in 1942, their last child Sylvia was born. Before we talk about the events that happened on that fateful day, it is crucial to paint a vivid picture of the seemingly normal evening that preceded it. The Sodder home was brimming with the kind of joy only a family can share during the holidays. Their oldest son was away fighting in World War II. 19-year-old Marion, the oldest daughter, had just returned from her job at the dime store in downtown Fayetteville. She had saved her money and bought her siblings some new toys. Martha, aged 12, Jenny, 8, and Betty, just 5, the children were all excited on this magical evening. The younger children pleaded with their mother to stay up later than usual just for this night. Their mother agreed, but with stipulations. They could stay up later providing their 14-year-old brother Maurice and 9-year-old Louis didn't forget to do their chores of feeding the cows and chickens and putting the animals away. George the father and 2 of the oldest sons, John 22 and George Jr. 16, had already went to bed for the night. Jenny took the youngest, Sylvia, just 2 years old, upstairs for bed. At 1:30 a.m., the mom, Jenny, woke up smelling smoke. To her horror, the room her husband used for his office was ablaze, in the area of where the fuse box would have been. Jenny first woke her husband, George, and their 2 older sons. Amidst the chaos and confusion, panic gripped the family as they realized their home was engulfed in flames. The thick smoke billowed, obscuring their vision, while the crackling of the fire roared like a relentless beast. Together, they gathered Marion and Sylvia and fled the house, but there were still 5 children left in the house: Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5. They all frantically yelled to the other children who were in the attic and the second floor, but there was no answer. The stairway going up was completely engulfed by the flames. The oldest daughter, Marion, tried to use the phone to call for help, but it did not work, so she ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. George tried to climb up the outside wall to the second floor after the family's ladder, which was missing from its usual place and nowhere to be found. A water barrel nearby could have been used, but it being December was frozen solid. George next tried to use 2 of his trucks to climb up to the second floor, but for some strange reason, neither one would start after working fine the previous day. Giving up in frustration and to the family's horror, realized that the other 5 children had surely perished in the fire, and 45 minutes later, the house would collapse. Due to the low manpower and the fact that the fire chief did not know how to drive the fire truck, the fire department would not arrive until the following morning. After a search of the burned ruins, some bones were found and what appeared to be some internal organs. I don't think anyone could imagine the emotions that the Sodder family were experiencing at this point. Nowhere to go and having just tragically lost 5 of your children. Now, after a few weeks, a lot of questions were coming up by the Sodder family and officials. There were also many strange incidents leading to believe this wasn't an accident. Now let's first address the elephant in the room. Where were the remains? Now I guess there is a possibility that the fire could have been hot enough to consume an entire person, but all 5 with no remains at all? Seems a bit hard to believe. And for the claims of the bone fragments and internal organs found. The bone fragments were sent away for testing. It was found that they were vertebrae from the same human, estimated to be 16 or 17 years old. But being the oldest of the 5 missing children was 14, this didn't make any sense either. Also, the bones that were found had not been exposed to fire at all. Later on, the bone fragments were confirmed to have come from a cemetery in nearby Mount Hope. Who took them, and how did they end up at the Sodder residence? The fire department had confirmed that the fire had started near the electrical box and was electrical in nature, although George had recently had the house rewired and inspected. The ladder that was missing had been found down an embankment 75 feet away. Who had removed the ladder? When Marion had tried to call for help and the phone line wasn't working, the obvious conclusion was that the phone wires had been damaged in the fire. A telephone repairman reported that the phone lines had not been burned, as he initially thought, but had been cut by someone who had climbed 14 feet up the pole to do it. And why did George's vehicles not start after working fine the previous day? All of these questions were creating doubt in the Sodders' minds. Another thing that happened, that night Ginny was awakened 30 minutes before the fire had started by a loud crash of something hitting the roof of the house and rolling down the slope. After not hearing anything else, she had fallen back to sleep. What had made that noise? Evidence soon emerged that the fire had not been electrical at all, but had been deliberately set. The driver of a bus that had passed by late Christmas Eve had seen some people throwing balls of fire at the house. All of the evidence contrary to the official story had started to appear, and George and Ginny believed that their 5 children were still alive and had been kidnapped. But what would have been a motive for someone to do this to the Sodder family? Well, we have to think about what was happening at the time. It was 1945, and World War II was winding down. George Sodder had been very outspoken against Mussolini, and living in a large Italian community was not a very popular opinion, with many people threatening George Sodder to keep his mouth closed. Could the fire be a retaliation for George's unpopular remarks? The Sodders had hired a private investigator to look into the strange occurrences surrounding the fire. He had learned that the fire chief Morris had found an internal organ in the house, and not wanting to further upset the Sodders, had buried it in a metal box. The metal box was retrieved, and the contents were tested and found to be a beef liver. Later, Morris confessed to having placed the beef liver to convince the Sodders that the children had perished in the fire. Why would a person do this? There were further witnesses claiming to have seen the children at a diner the next day. A waitress claimed to have served them. They were accompanied by 2 men in a car with Florida plates. Another woman had reported that she had seen the children with 2 men in a hotel a week later. She had tried to speak to the children, but the two men had quickly ushered them away, giving her a dirty look. She had claimed they had all been speaking in Italian. The Sodders had relentlessly searched for their missing children for the rest of their lives. A massive billboard had been erected along Route 16 in Ansted, West Virginia. It had pictures of the 5 children and in bold letters, "What was their fate?" It also offered a reward of $5,000. George had followed up on many leads he had received, traveling to St. Louis, Missouri, where Martha had been sighted in a convent, but George had found nothing. He had also traveled to Houston, Texas, where 2 of his sons claimed to be, again running into a dead end. Although many leads had led nowhere, the Sodders never gave up. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny had received an envelope in the mail from Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address, but a photograph inside of a young man. On the back of the photo was written, "Louis Sodder." The authorities believed there had just been a hoax, but the Sodders believed that the photo was an uncanny likeness of what Louis would have looked like as an adult. It is believed by many that the Italian mafia was behind the events in retaliation for George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. George died on August 16, 1969, at the age of 73. Jenny and her surviving children continued to seek answers. Jenny died on February 15, 1989, at the age of 85. The billboard was taken down shortly after. Many of the Sodder children continued publicizing the case and investigating leads. The youngest member of the family, Sylvia, died on April 21, 2021, at the age of 79. Her older missing siblings, if they had survived, were most likely deceased as well. The case has been investigated and pondered by many amateurs and professionals alike, but no concrete evidence has ever been found. So without any further details, it will remain a mystery to be pondered. Thank you for joining us, and until next time.